This is ground up like a medium ground coffee grind. It's what we found works out the best.
No matter what, no bubbles,
Like
completely decarboxylated all the air.
I went in for a pretty routine surgery. When I got out, I had hospital-acquired spinal meningitis. They sent me home from the hospital on fentanyl patches, morphine, all kinds of horrible drugs, and basically said, here, this is the rest of your life. I'd gone from being this incredibly vibrant, can-do anything person to I'm the one sitting there watching while everybody else is living their life and I'm doing nothing. I identify as a Dallas girl, as a Texan in a lot of ways, a Jewish Texan, which is even weirder. I never liked cannabis. I was one of those people that smoked pot a few times and was like, I don't like the way it makes me feel. On the other hand, I had to do something because life was becoming less worthwhile living day by day.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Okay. Be careful with that water while I'm over here with the weed. You know how I feel about that.
It's done. There's not even a dose left in that.
Okay. Want to taste it?
Purple Urkel.
What I found was no consistency, no predictability, certainly nothing that remotely resembled medicine. So as a process engineer, I'm going to have to do it myself.
We learned that we had to activate it first, or decarboxylate it, and then you can cook that into an oil base. And so we went in the cookbook and tried to find the recipe with the most oil in it.
The first thing I made was my Aunt Zelda's carrot cake. I can gauge how strong I made it by how much of regular oil versus infused oil I put in it. Then we would weigh the piece and know exactly what the dose was in each and every piece. And that's called medicine. What's happened just from having the cannabis as far as improving my health. It's just been miraculous.
Hey, Nance, Mara here. I just wanted to let you know, I know you've got the .054 capsules of the canatonic. If there's any way you can back off a little bit on the morphine and oxycodone, that would be really great. I have to make up the medicine for Linda. Got Marie. The way I manage this is pretty much with my hair on fire all the time. Unfortunately, it's just stored in me.
The biggest problem with cannabis is that everybody has such a different tolerance for it that the biggest problem is dosing. And that's why we're dosing specialists.
Now, what do you recommend for Linda for her cancer? She's at stage 4. It's in both lungs now. It's all through her abdomen. So we really have to get aggressive at this point.
Mm-hmm. But she doesn't want to have that feeling of that quote-unquote stoniness, the high THC. I was thinking about putting her on the Williams Wonder and then cutting it with the canatonic.
That's a good plan.
Okay.
Marie.
As many people as we can help, I mean, we just can't say no. I mean, how can you say no to a needy person? I mean, how can we send them somewhere where they're just going to get bad product or bad information?
The whole protocol is going to be about £1, which is like $1,200 is about what we pay for it. And we just pass that on to you, and then we cover the overhead.
Well, how did you find us?
Google.
I didn't even know we were on Google.
Take care. Help's on the way.
Reduction went from 30% to 70% seizure reduction. I've been a physician now for 24 years. I made the change from pediatric ER to cannabis practice because I knew someone who was using medical cannabis who was sick. And seeing her do so well with this, I thought, wow, here I am a doctor and I don't even have an opinion because I don't know. So that's kind of where then I started that quest for knowledge to make myself a person who understands this and then can help other people understand it. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for getting up early to come here and hear me speak. I have seen things that we can call miracles, and I think it's really important to understand that to a family that's suffering, it feels like a miracle, but it's really just science, and there's no reason to be afraid of it, and there's no reason that this is not an option for everyone. In 1988, researchers discovered living things, humans, have cannabinoid receptors in their brains.
Most people are familiar with dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, classical neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that allow neurons to talk to each other. When neuron A talks to neuron B, it sends a chemical messenger across the synapse, and that binds to receptors at neuron B, and then that turns into electricity.
What we've discovered is that there's a part of that system is governed by cannabinoid compounds. These are just molecules that we have that bind to these specific receptors, and they seem to play a role in smoothing out the whole communication process.
It seems to be so important that a group at NIH recently published a review and said that the endocannabinoid system is involved in essentially all human diseases. Now that's a very strong statement, very strong.
Those receptors are not there for the cannabis plant, but it turns out that the cannabis plant compounds called cannabinoids work at those receptors.
So when you take a cannabinoid in from outside by smoking or vaporizing or eating or a pharmaceutical, you are somehow tinkering with that system and adjusting the way in which those nerves and muscles and communications happen.
I often joke around with my patients, it's not magic fairy dust, it's not voodoo. There are chemical compounds in the plant that interact with the cells in our brains and in our bodies and have certain reactions. It's the same as every other drug. It's just came from a plant.
I, as an herbalist, felt duped, felt lied to. As I tell people about magnificent herbs all the time, cannabis was just off limits. I mean, I was in that culture of it. I thought it was this poisonous weed. I have 9 children, and I have seen a lot of people with cancer. These experiences are just too overwhelming to ignore. I looked at my books and said, there has to be cannabis in here. I've never looked for it, and it was everywhere. They start out with, this is so well known to every good housewife in the country that I shall not need to write a description of it. And then it goes down to tell you, including how to use the roots. And this book is 1805. All of these tabs are references to cannabis and how to use cannabis. We lost this. This is a tool we really need, and we're not too stupid to do it. We're not too stupid to handle this plant.
My father said to me, you know, when I was at the University of Minnesota School of Pharmacy in 1928, one of the assignments we had was to make tincture of cannabis, and we had to be very careful because the alcohol was illegal. And I thought, well, how quaint, you know, but we don't use plants anymore. And it probably took me a good 15 or 20 years to really appreciate that this stuff still was medicine.
It was part of the pharmacopoeia, you know, well into the 20th century. It was a frequently prescribed medication, not to smoke it, but in its tinctures, etc. And if you look at then why and how it was criminalized, really the key factor was the role of racism and xenophobia, anti-Mexican sentiment. People often point their finger at Harry Anslinger, who was the founder, the first head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. But in fact, he didn't start off being an anti-marijuana ideologue. It was really as the 30s progressed that he began to see the political opportunity in this. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 is basically a prohibition law.
The American Medical Association told Congress in 1937, we sent a representative and said that you should not ban this substance because substantial medical uses and developments will be neglected, and also there's things that we are already using this for that we don't have substitutes for.
Is this a medicine? Cannabis has been a medicine for 3,000 years. It only hasn't been a medicine in this country for 70 years. I think it's a medicine.
It's 70 years of propaganda that you're trying to fight against, and that's not something that's going to change overnight. I mean, honestly, you know, a lot of people look at me and say, really, you would have given your 7-year-old child marijuana? And with what I know now, absolutely. But if you'd asked me that same question 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have been in that skeptical camp. You know, unfortunately, the parents know a lot more about this than the doctors do, because when you become so desperate that you're willing to try anything, you learn. And if I cry, I apologize, but a day before my son passed away, I prayed to God to take him because the suffering was just too bad. And if I can help one parent, just one, not make that prayer of desperation. That's what my goal is in life now.
Here's her bottle. Give Mama a kiss.
See, nap time, I'll see you. I'll see you in an hour.
This is her cannabis oil regimen that we have right now. CT stands for the canatonic. We give her the size of about 1/2 grain of rice 2 times a day. So this is what Sophie looks like when she starts to feel the effects of her medicine. She's not moving around as much and she's a little sleepy faced, but this is it. It is day 8 since we first started giving her the cannabis oil. She, as of today, is starting to get 2 different oils. So considering that a little bit of sleepiness is all we're seeing as a side effect, I'd say this has definitely been a much better alternative to chemo thus far. All right, let's see if we can get her to take it. Come on, honey. Good girl. There you go. We just put a little drop on her pacifier. Tiny, tiny little drop. We're going to give that to her while she's sleeping. So we had to up Sophie's medicine. She's in a very good mood. Aren't you, honey? Are you happy right now? She is playful and laughing and smiling. Yeah, I'm just glad you guys are supporting us, holding off on the chemo.
We recognize with this diagnosis, there is some room here in terms of exploring complementary therapies, but in general, we have a historical standard of care that we have. As long as we keep that in mind,
Absolutely.
moving forward for sure, we definitely can intervene at any time, and she already has the ported device in place.
They all know what our treatment plan is. They all know we're using the oils. They've had nothing negative to say. They haven't thought in any way, shape, or form we're being bad parents or doing anything that is harmful to our child in any way, which is fantastic because we wouldn't do it if our doctors didn't support us. He did bring up, the chemo word, which I even hate talking about it. We still believe in our hearts that this is going to work. I mean, she's thriving right now. Her eye's getting better, and I don't know if it means anything, and Dr. Chang couldn't tell us if it means anything because you don't know until you actually do the MRI scan. If I looked at it from a logical standpoint, as the tumor gets smaller and releases pressure, the eye shakes less. That to me is logical thinking. Right. So I'm gonna go with logic and say that the tumor's already getting smaller. That's what I'm gonna go with.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, AJ has to see the doctor. He has to see the doctor so we can get some more medicine.
We good. We're gonna go get some chocolate and then get some.
Let me check your eyeballs. Look at my nose. Okay, now can you follow the light with your eyes? Don't move your head. Look up. We went to the pediatricians.
Okay.
They evaluated him, and that's when she sent us to the ER and said that we probably would not return home because she realized it was serious.
Right. So they diagnosed it based on what they saw on the CAT scan and the MRI.
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
And then what did they tell you?
What they normally do is radiation. It had to be done like right away because he was already to the point where he couldn't swallow by the time we, the first day of being in the hospital.
And what did they tell you his prognosis is?
Well, they suspect 6 to 9 months of life. After that, then it would be the end
So
for
they
him.
shrunk it to give him more quality of life.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
And they had nothing more to
So
offer.
scary.
It
yeah.
is.
Yeah. In the state of California, my job as a medical cannabis consultant is to determine whether or not AJ qualifies based on the law for medical cannabis, and he does. Okay, so I'm gonna get you the letter.
Okay.
And everybody talks about a card. It's not a card, it's a letter. And in that letter, I make the statement that he qualifies and that I'm approving him to use it. Okay. You've probably heard of stories of some of the other patients that have had brain tumors that are responding to high dose cannabis oil.
Yes, ma'am.
There are no guarantees because I have to tell you, there's no clinical trials. There's no. I have had 10 kids with the same tumor, and we studied them, and half of them got placebo, and half of them, it doesn't exist. Right. He's still within 2 months of being diagnosed.
Right.
It's still pretty early, right? Even though it's a fairly aggressive tumor.
Right.
You're not coming here saying, we have
they gave us 2 weeks.
Mhm.
You have some time here, which
Right.
is really good.